Good afternoon, Mets fans, and welcome to a Wednesday afternoon edition of Driving with Mr. Met. I am Mr. Met, and since our last video yesterday morning, which was very reactionary to some tweets and some rumors and some freaking out of Mets fans, myself included, I'll throw myself into the mix there. Things have quieted down a little bit on the trade Noah Syndergaard front and on the JT Realmuto front / sweepstakes, or whatever you want to call it. I want to talk about where things stand at the present time and talk about a couple of other things that happened since yesterday morning. As of about, about a half an hour or so ago, let me back up a second. As of about an hour ago, the most recent news that I'd read was from Ken Rosenthal. It was, I think, around 7 o'clock or so last night when Kenny Rosenthal said that he believes that the Mets will still be the team that ends up with JT Realmuto. He didn't surmise as to how that would be the case, but he basically said, look, the Mets seem to be the most realistic suitors for Realmuto, the ones that are the team that's going after him the hardest. And I think we can all agree that's certainly the case, that Brodie Van Wagenen and the Mets are making the hardest push to acquire the Marlins catcher. Yesterday, as we know, the rumor mill went crazy with the talks of the Yankees being involved and there being a potential 3-team trade. And it was funny, I listened to the Say Anything podcast from yesterday. I think that's where it was. Maybe it was someplace else where I heard it or read it, but they talked about the last big 3-team trade the Mets made, and it was 10 years ago. And it was interesting that the winter meetings at that time were in Las Vegas. And that deal, if you recall, brought J.J. Putz and Shawn Green to the Mets from the Mariners. The deal involved the Mets sending Joe Smith to Cleveland. The Indians were the third team. There were a whole bunch of players involved. It was a huge deal, a deal that did not work out well for the Mets, as we went on to find out. But at the time, it was looked at as a huge, great trade and whatever. But it's interesting that that was 10 years ago, and the Yankees being involved with the Mets now. There's nothing to this other than that it seems as though Brodie Van Wagenen and Brian Cashman, to his credit, these guys are willing to talk about possible deals. And that was certainly not the case when Sandy Alderson was the GM of the Mets. He seemed to really sort of back away from any possible trade talks that involved the Yankees. I don't know why that was, but it certainly did seem to be the case, and it seems to be proving true now that Van Wagenen and Cashman are talking, and they seem to have a good relationship. It doesn't mean anything's going to happen, but I just thought it was interesting, and I wanted to point that out. But back to Realmuto. As of about a half an hour ago, which is what I started saying at the beginning, there was a report that the Cincinnati Reds are now in the mix to try and get Realmuto from the Marlins. They are flashing their top-rated outfield prospect youngster. I can't think of his name, but it starts with a T. As the piece that the Marlins would get back. What I found most interesting about all this talk with the Mets and the Yankees yesterday, and to a lesser extent earlier today, was what was in it for the Marlins. That was my interesting take from all that. Like, what are the Marlins actually getting out of this? We were talking about the Mets sending Syndergaard to the Yankees, and the Mets getting Realmuto, and that not being enough of a return for Syndergaard. So then Andujar's name was thrown in, and it's like, let's not forget, Florida has to walk away from this with something pretty substantial too. And so I didn't know what that might be, what it might look like. And honestly, no one really knows what that's going to look like until the trade happens. We don't know what names are being floated around. Brodie Van Wagenen said yesterday that the public pretty much knew about 10% of what was really happening. And he joked that he preferred that to be 0%, but I think he was realistic about it. That's never going to happen. in the Twitterverse and in the age of real-time news distribution and whatnot. But it was interesting for me to read that the Reds are now looking to jump into the mix here. And from a Mets standpoint, I have to be completely honest, and I've said this like 10 times in the last week, JT Realmuto is a fantastic catcher. There's no getting around it. He's really good. He's going to make any team better. There's no doubt about that. But the drop-off between Realmuto and the free agents that are available, Grandal and Ramos, to me, they're not significant enough drop-offs where you have to say, we cannot survive without Realmuto. He has to be the guy we get. Otherwise, it's not worth making a move for a catcher. I just don't buy that. Yasmani Grandal is a great player. He had a really lousy postseason, but that should not impact his overall value, and I think it is impacting his value. And that's a good thing for a team like the Mets, who are looking to acquire a quality major league catcher. If Grandal's market is down, if there's no one after him, maybe the Mets can just say, forget about Realmuto. We don't need him. We can do just as well, maybe a little bit worse, but just as well, close enough to it as we could with Realmuto. Not have to part with Syndergaard, not have to part with Rosario, not have to part with Nimmo. Just pay freaking Grandal and be done with it, and then start addressing the bullpen. To me, that's the smart play in all of this. But we'll see what unfolds. I love that the Reds are in the mix, though. I think the more teams that get in the mix that push the Mets further from Realmuto, I think that's better for the Mets, ultimately. And I hope that's how it continues to unfold. But we'll see. The Reds thing is, like I said, a pretty fresh rumor that just came out like about a half an hour ago. And we'll see where that goes, if it goes anywhere. The other thing I wanted to just mention, that yesterday the Phillies inked a 3-year contract for Andrew McCutchen to play in Philadelphia. An odd signing to me for the Phillies, if only because of the length. I don't know why you'd give 3 years to McCutchen. I liked a lot of what Michael Mayer was saying about looking at McCutchen as a potential outfielder for the Mets. Thought he would have been a good piece, but certainly not on a three-year deal. So the outfield question remains open for the Mets, but we'll see how that unfolds as well. At the moment, things are sitting sort of idle, but we know there's lots of talk in Las Vegas amongst the general managers and everybody else who's down there figuring out what each team is going to do next. So I'll try to stay on top of it as best as I can over the next couple of days. If there's anything breaking and worth reporting, I'll do that tomorrow, but we'll see what happens between now and then. So until that time, whatever it might be, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Mr_Met. And as always, let's go Mets.